What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazday. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now, listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So, come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazday. I'm flying solo, baby. So, a question for all you right now. This is a question. I had a former episode. It was a solo. It was about comparison is the thief of joy. And, oftentimes when we think about comparison being the thief of joy, I want you to ask yourself the question, are you comparing not only yourself to other people, but are you comparing yourself or your current circumstances, your current decisions against a made up circumstance or a made up ideal outcome that didn't happen? And I thought about this. I was thinking about this a lot because I was going back kind of through my history and when I was the most dissatisfied with my decision making was when I was comparing my current outcomes against a made up outcome that never would have happened. And so I want you to start thinking to yourself, am I comparing my outcomes or comparing my current circumstances against a more ideal outcome or a more ideal circumstance that just isn't part of the equation? And I realized that we do that actually probably more often than comparing ourselves against other people, is we compare ourselves against make-believe outcomes and make-believe circumstances that just aren't part of the equation. And one of the things that I did in the process of kind of running through that exercise is I ran through, and you do this a lot in business, especially as entrepreneurs, like hindsight's 2020, and there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking around like decisions. But I often will put myself in the circumstance and say like, okay, I'm going to press the rewind button. And this is a really good exercise for you to do if you're like struggling with like, oh, I should have done this, or if hindsight being 2020, I would have made a different decision. And so what I do is I press the rewind button out of all these different like life adventures I've been on. And I go back to the beginning of the adventure and I say, okay, Darius, I'm going to show you a video of what this decision is going to create for you. Let's call it big decision. Let's say you're taking a job, or you're choosing a career, or you're starting a business, or you're marrying someone, or you're getting into a big relationship. But these big life choices, and an exercise that I would recommend that you do is you press the rewind button, go to the beginning, the person that was like, I want to do X. I want to make this big decision. And in conscious leadership, this is called game filming. And what you do is you game film that I'm going to show Darius before he's made that decision, before he has knowledge. I'm going to show him a video of what this adventure is going to look like. The whole thing, all the way up to right now where I'm feeling, maybe regretting the decision, or whether I'm, beating myself up, or I'm like, saying I should have done X, Y, and Z better. But I'm going to say, look, you can't change what happens in the adventure, but you have to watch the entire adventure on video. And then I'm going to ask a question of myself, which is a very interesting question. I'm going to ask myself a question. Hey, knowing what you know now, would you still do that adventure? Would you still make that decision? You got to watch the whole thing. There's going to be parts you're going to be cringing at. You're going to say, oh my God, that's what happens? Or, oh my gosh, that's the BS I got to deal with? And the answer is yes, because nothing changes in the adventure. You don't get to change anything, but you get to watch the adventure, and your future self, your past self, gets asked the question, hey, knowing what you know now, would you still make the decision to go forward and do this? And it's funny, as I did that, and there's, I'm 46 years old, so I've had, enough adventures in my life where I could go back and kind of run those numbers. I can say, okay, Darius, it is, fall of 2010. you know, 2009, you're about to make X decision. In this case, it was to shut down my last business and go and start doing joint ventures. Would you do? Would you do that again? Watching the tape, seeing what happens over the next 10 years. And it's funny when I do it for that particular period for myself, I don't know if I would have. I'm not sure if I would have. Maybe I would have. I don't know though. It's it's maybe more of a coin toss, right? And what I find is that I usually end up in a couple different camps. One camp is what I just said right now. If I go, I'll use the example of 2009 to 2019. I don't know if I would have done that. I gave up a decade of my life. You know, it was a really valuable decade. It was my 30s, right? So I gave up a decade of my life. I got to do some really cool stuff, but there was a heavy expense. The ticket was very expensive to do that stuff. And knowing what I know now, I don't think the outcome was like, probably the return on time was not where I thought it would be. And it was like from at least from my seat, from a learning perspective, the return on time was great. From a ROI, return on investment for return on time, I actually think it was actually fairly mediocre, at least from where my expectations are. Now, that experience has opened me up to what I'm doing right now, which I don't know if I would have gotten there. I hope I would have gotten there, but maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't have. And the time, if I go back prior to, when I look at 09, I really have to go back for myself to 07, because it was an 07 to 019. It was 12-year period. And there was a lot of downtime. There was a lot of dues paid from 07, 08, 09, 10, 11. Those are 5 years of just almost zero ROI from a financial perspective, negative ROI, if anything. And the return on time was questionable. So that time period, when I play back the tape and say like, hey, knowing what you know now, you got to watch that. Would you do it? And the answer for 07 to 11, the answer is no, I wouldn't have done that. I would have figured something else out. There was a lot of better opportunities for return on time. So I want you to start doing that. Pick, like, when you start thinking of, let's say, a current circumstance you're in, or something you're beating yourself up about that happened in your past. You're like, oh, I made the wrong decision. I should have done something different. The way to approach that's like, maybe, but go back to the person that made the decision to do that, because this is the beauty of this. You made the decision. You own this. You made the decision to do it, right? And rewind the tape and say, hey, everything, it still ends up being exactly the same. You don't get to change the variables of what happens. You know, it's not like pick your adventure. The adventure is what it is. But you're going back to the Darius 07 and saying, hey, man, you got a choice here. Do you want to do this? Here's the video of the next 5 years. For me, that's a hard no. 07, I'd be like, I'm out. That's a bad use of my time. Bad ROI. I don't learn enough for the pain. Because sometimes one of the things about this is this idea that, like, pressure and friction creates change and creates learning and turns you into who you are, right? Like the stress on the vine creates the best wine. So sometimes if the best wine ends up coming out of that, and arguably there was good wine that came out of my experience doing that, I don't think the ROI was good enough. It wasn't good enough wine. So is the ticket worth the ride? Is the stress on the vine worth the wine, right? And so I do that a lot now, where in the past I used to compare myself to other people a lot. And I just had this learning lesson around comparing a current state or a expected outcome against what I had hoped when I went into an adventure into the actual outcome. And I asked myself a simple question. Hey, Darius, you got to watch the video from start to finish of what it took to create that, knowing the good, the bad, and the ugly. Go back to that early state Darius and say, hey, man, would you make that decision again? And many times I'm like, hell yeah, I would have. And knowing that my ideal outcome didn't end up happening, but the outcome that happened was good enough where it's a good decision to make. And it's interesting when you take that perspective, especially if it's a current situation you're in, let's say. If you take that perspective, then what you're allowed to do is to, like, let's say you're in a current situation where you're like, hey, this is not the ideal outcome, right? But it's an okay outcome. I'm going to rewind the tape. I know why I made the decision to go start that business or to get into that relationship. I know why I made that. It's not where I want it to be, but I'm still going back in time, I would still make that same decision right now. I would not change the decision to make that decision. Then that empowers you because now you're like, okay, you're A, owning the circumstance, and B, you have a choice. And as we say in conscious leadership, with awareness comes choice. You have a choice at that moment of what can I do to make the most of this current situation, knowing that I would have chosen to have done it as things are, and knowing that I'm in control of how I want this to come out. And maybe it's not going to be your ideal outcome, but it's a good enough outcome where the juice is worth the squeeze. So that was an interesting learning and exercise that it just kind of like dawned on me. I connected the dots on that. I'm a person that's very like introspective, and I always kind of look back at my decisions and think like, hey, how could I have done that differently or made that better? And I do. I'll go back to 20 years ago and think about decisions I made then of things that I would have potentially have done differently. And there's many. I don't have regrets over it, but I am a person that as I look back on as an adult, as an entrepreneur, as I look back at my life, I'm like, hey, that's something I would have done differently. And sometimes I'm like, hey, that's something I wish would have gone differently, but I still would have made the same decision. And I think there's a really important separation between the two. If it's something that I wish I had done differently, what can I have learned from that so that I don't make that same mistake again? If it's something that I would have still made the same decision, then it's a question of what could I have done to make myself enjoy the ride a little bit more, right? What could I have done to have gratitude to be in that moment? And if the answer is I'm being resentful about being in that moment or resentful about that decision, even though I still would have done it, then the learning is not happening. The learning should be, well, okay, what could I have done differently to have enjoyed that ride better? Because I'm still owning the fact that I would have still made that decision. So I think that that's a really important thing, as we say, like if comparison is the thief of joy, it's not just about comparing ourselves against other people. It's also about comparing our circumstances, our decisions against a better decision or a better circumstance. And I think that that's probably more often than not what happens in real life. We are comparing ourselves against a fake outcome or comparing ourselves against a decision that we didn't make. And then we have regret, or then we'll beat ourselves up. And that's not healthy. And that doesn't actually solve for a better outcome next, because life is a journey and we get to go make those next outcomes. And I'm going to talk about this in a future podcast, but it's like all we have is right now. So if all you have is the present, what are you doing to enjoy that present moment as best you can? So I'll leave you with that thought. Appreciate you very much. Peace out. Love you.
She's my lover.
You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.